The chair across from Derek Caulfield's desk was the kind that looked comfortable but wasn't. I had sat in it maybe 100 times over the years. Budget reviews, client escalations, the occasional staffing argument. I knew that chair the way you know a place you never actually wanted to be. Derek's office had glass walls on two sides. That was by design. Everyone walking through the main floor could see in. I always thought that said something about the man. He liked being watched. He liked the idea that people knew he was the one behind the glass, making decisions. That morning, he was leaning back in his chair with his hands folded on his stomach. Relaxed, like he had already finished the hard part and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me without saying a word at first. Just pushed it across the smooth surface and watched my face. I looked down at it. That if this is your first time here, hit subscribe to join our community. I share real workplace stories every day for anyone who believes quiet competence should always be respected. It was a demotion notice. My name at the top. My current title, Regional Operations Director, crossed out in the pre-filled form. Below it, in clean printed letters, Senior Logistics Coordinator. That was the title I had held 15 years ago, before I built out the vendor network. Before I managed the pharmaceutical compliance rollout. Before I saved the company from a DOT audit that could have cost them their 3-state operating license. Before any of it. The pay cut listed at the bottom of the form was $34,000 a year. Effective immediately. Derek finally spoke. He did not look at me when he said it. We're restructuring around talent that can grow with us, Marcus. This isn't personal. I want you to sit with that for a second. This isn't personal. That is what a man says when something is very personal and he does not want to own it. I did not say anything right away. I looked at that piece of paper for a long moment. I read every line. I looked at the signature line at the bottom where I was supposed to sign. Then I set it back down on his desk. Here is what Derek Caulfield did not know when I walked into that office that morning. It was my 47th birthday. My wife, Sandra, had made me eggs and toast before I left the house. She had put her hand on my shoulder when she set the plate down, the way she does when she is happy. My daughter, Lily, had left a card on the kitchen counter before school, the kind with a cartoon dog on the front that says something silly inside. She was 17. She still bought me cards like that. I hope she never stops. I had driven to work that morning with the windows cracked a little, even though it was cool outside. I remember noticing that. I remember thinking things felt quiet in a good way. Like the noise of the last few years had finally settled. The mortgage was manageable. Lily's college applications were in. My dad was stable at the care facility. For the first time in what felt like a long time, I had gone to work on a Tuesday morning without a single fire waiting for me. And then I sat in that chair. And then Derek slid that paper across the desk. And then he said it wasn't personal. I left his office without signing anything. I told him I would need to review the document. He looked mildly surprised by that, like he had expected me to just fold. Most people did when Derek had already decided something. He had that kind of certainty about him that made other people feel like the outcome was already settled. Maybe it was, just not the way he thought. I walked back to my desk slowly. I did not talk to anyone. I sat down, opened my computer, and stared at the screen for a few minutes without actually seeing it. Something inside me had gone very quiet. I have learned over the years that when I get that quiet, not sad, not angry, just still, it usually means something is about to break. I just did not know yet what it was going to be. My name is Marcus Elliot. I am 47 years old. I have worked for Crestfield Distribution for 22 years. I want you to understand what that number means. 22 years is not just a resume line. It is the first job you took when your daughter was still a baby and you needed health insurance more than you needed to be impressive. It is the promotions you earned slowly, one problem solved at a time. It is the version of yourself that got built inside one building, with one company, over more than 2 decades. I started at Crestfield at 25. I was on the loading dock, doing inventory counts and cross-checking manifests. It was not glamorous. It was early mornings and hard floors and learning how freight actually moved in the real world. Not the way it looks on a spreadsheet, but the way it actually moves, with all the delays and driver personalities and vendor quirks that no software system ever fully captures. From the dock, I moved into dispatch coordination, then regional scheduling, then vendor relations, which is where I started to understand how much of a logistics company's survival depends on relationships that never appear on any official or chart. 9 years ago, I was promoted to Regional Operations Director. It was the job I had been working toward without ever saying it out loud. I oversaw the full operation across 3 states: driver compliance, client contracts, vendor management, DOT reporting, and the day-to-day decisions that kept roughly 280 people working and roughly 40 major client accounts satisfied. I was not the most polished person in the building. I did not play golf with the executives or laugh at the right moments in board presentations. I wore the same style of shirt every day, and I brought my lunch most of the time. I was not the kind of man who got noticed in a room, but I was the person every department head called when something was actually broken. Not to talk about it, to fix it. There is a difference, and most companies only have 1 or 2 people who can actually do the second thing. What that $34,000 pay cut meant in real terms was this: a mortgage on the house Sandra had fallen in love with 7 years ago, the one with the yard that her mother spent half a summer helping us plant. Lily's first year of college tuition starting in 8 months, which we had been planning and saving toward for 3 years. And my father, who had been in a memory care facility for 2 years and needed a monthly supplement that I covered quietly because his insurance did not stretch far enough. That paper Derek pushed across his desk was not an insult to my career. It was a structural threat to my family. I had spent 22 years believing something that I think a lot of people in my position believe. I believed that if you did the work carefully, if you showed up and solved the problems and kept the operation running, the work itself would protect you. I was about to find out how wrong that belief had made me, and how expensive that lesson was going to be for someone, just not for me. Let me tell you about Brandon Keefe. Brandon was 34 years old. He had an MBA from school with a name that looks good on a slide deck. He had worked at 2 other companies before Crestfield, both for less than 2 years each. He dressed well, not in a flashy way, but in the way that signals to certain people in certain rooms that you belong there. Tailored shirts, good shoes, the kind of put together that reads as competent before you have said a single word. He was brought in 18 months before my demotion under a title I had never seen at Crestfield before: Strategic Operations Consultant. I did not know what that title meant in practice. I'm not sure anyone did, but it paid well, it came with a private office, and it reported directly to Derek Caulfield. I did not dislike Brandon when he arrived. That is important to say, because this story is not about hating someone younger than me for being younger than me. I have never been that kind of man. When he started, I actually went out of my way to help him get oriented. I walked him through the regional client accounts. I explained which contracts had automatic penalty clauses that could trigger if delivery windows were missed by more than 4 hours. I showed him how the pharmaceutical runs were scheduled and why the timing on those was not flexible the way regular freight was. He was a good listener, took notes, thanked me warmly at the end of every conversation. About 3 months after he arrived, our executive assistant, Carol, mentioned something to me in passing. Carol had been at Crestfield for 19 years. She was the kind of person who knew everything that happened in that building and said very little about most of it. So when she told me something, I paid attention. She told me that Brandon had gone into a meeting with Derek and presented what he called an operational risk analysis for the regional accounts. She had typed up the meeting summary. She recognized the information. It was word for word in several places the material I had walked Brandon through in our onboarding conversations. I did not storm into Derek's office. I did not confront Brandon. I did not send an angry email. I just filed that information away and kept doing my job. What became clear over the following year was that Derek had a plan he had not shared with anyone openly. He was rebuilding the operations leadership layer of the company, replacing experienced, higher-salaried staff with younger hires, MBA credentials, fresh energy, lower base pay, and absolutely no institutional memory. They looked good in board presentations. They used the right language. They made Derek look like he was modernizing. One by one, people I had worked alongside for years were either pushed out, restructured into lesser roles, or quietly let go. A regional scheduling manager with 16 years at the company. A vendor compliance lead who knew every carrier relationship in the Midwest. Gone. Both of them replaced by people Brandon seemed to know or know of. I was the last significant holdout. The demotion was not a restructuring decision. It was the final piece of a plan that had been in motion for over a year. Derek thought he knew what he was removing when he demoted me. He did not know what I actually knew. And more importantly, he had no idea what I had been quietly keeping alive behind the scenes, without ever once explaining to anyone how it worked or why it mattered. He was about to find out. There is a version of this story where I am just a bitter older employee who got passed over and got lucky. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think you deserve a narrator who does not pretend he was perfect. But there is also a version of this story that is simply true. And the true version involves something that Derek Caulfield never bothered to understand because he never thought he needed to. Let me explain it as simply as I can. 8 years ago, Crestfield had a compliance problem. Our pharmaceutical delivery tracking was being done through a patchwork of spreadsheets and a legacy system that was not built for DOT reporting requirements. We were not falsifying anything at that point. We were just disorganized in a way that was going to become a legal problem eventually. I could see it coming. I flagged it twice in writing to the leadership team. Nothing happened, so I went looking for a solution on my own. I found a small software company called Meridian Track. They were not a major vendor. No flashy sales team, no expensive conference booth. They were a founder-led operation run by a man named Tom Garza, who had spent 15 years working in freight compliance before building the software himself. It was not perfect, but it was designed by someone who actually understood the problem, which made it more useful than anything the big vendors were offering at twice the price. I brought Meridian Track in on a pilot contract. I negotiated the terms personally. I learned the system deeply, not just how to use it, but how it was built and why certain things worked the way they did. I integrated it into our DOT reporting workflow, into our pharmaceutical delivery confirmation process, and into the invoicing triggers for our 4 largest client accounts. The system worked. The compliance gaps closed. And over time, Meridian Track became the quiet backbone of Crestfield's entire regional operation. Here is what I never fully communicated to leadership, and I will own that. The formal contract with Meridian Track had lapsed twice over the years during budget freezes. Both times, Tom Garza and I had renewed the relationship informally. A phone call, a handshake agreement, a continued service arrangement based on personal trust. Tom had no meaningful loyalty to Crestfield as a company. His loyalty was to me. I had treated him fairly, paid invoices on time, and referred 2 other companies to him over the years. He trusted me. He did not particularly know or care about anyone else at Crestfield. Derek Caulfield knew Meridian Track existed the way a homeowner knows their house has electrical wiring. He knew it was there, he assumed someone competent was handling it, and he never once looked at how it was actually connected. Brandon Keefe did not even know the name. Now, I said there were 2 things Derek did not understand. The system was the first. The second was my records. Over 9 years as director, I had kept careful documentation of operational decisions, my own and others. Not obsessively, not because I was planning something, just because I'm the kind of person who writes things down. Dates, emails, meeting notes, printed copies of filings, including the filings I had been asked to sign during a cost-cutting period 2 years earlier. Filings where the DOT compliance windows for pharmaceutical deliveries had been reported as met when they had not been. Derek had pressured the operations team to close out those reporting windows early to avoid penalty fees. I had refused to sign those specific filings. I had routed the sign-off directly to Derek instead, with a written note explaining why I would not put my name on them. Derek had signed them himself, and I had kept copies of everything, his instructions, my refusal, and the final filings with his signature. I did not collect that information as a weapon. I collected it because I was the one responsible for that operation, and I needed to know what had happened and when and who had made what decision. That is just how I work. But sitting in that chair across from Derek on the morning of my 47th birthday, with that demotion notice in front of me, I understood something clearly for the first time. I had spent years protecting a company that had just decided I was no longer worth protecting. I did not want to burn anything down. But I was done being the person who kept the fire from spreading while no one noticed I was even there. I want to be clear about something. I did not walk out of Derek's office that morning with a plan. I did not have a list of moves ready to execute. I was not playing chess while everyone else played checkers, the way people like to say in stories like this. I was just a man who had been hit hard and was trying to stay standing. What I did in the 2 weeks after the demotion was not dramatic. From the outside, it probably looked like nothing at all. I came in every day. I sat at my desk. I answered emails. I did not slam doors or make speeches or tell anyone what I was feeling. I showed up, I worked, and I said almost nothing beyond what was required. But quietly, carefully, I did 3 things that would matter later. The first thing I did was call Tom Garza. I did not call him to threaten anyone or to pull any strings. I called him because he deserved to know the truth about what was happening and because I respected him enough to tell him directly instead of letting him find out through confusion. I told him my role at Crestfield had changed. I told him the person who would be managing their vendor relationship going forward was a man named Brandon Keefe. I told him Brandon was new to the operation and did not have any history with the Meridian track system yet. Tom went quiet for a moment. Then he told me that their informal contract renewal was coming up in 11 days. He said he had always handled it through me personally and that there was no formal renewal process in place with anyone else at Crestfield. He asked me what he should do. I told him to follow whatever process felt right to him. That was all I said. I did not tell him to stall. I did not tell him to cut access. I just told him to do what felt right, and I let him make his own decision. Tom Garza was a careful man who ran a careful business. I trusted him to handle it the way he saw fit. The second thing I did was call an employment attorney. I brought her 3 things. The demotion notice I had never signed. Documentation showing that Crestfield had already begun deducting the reduced salary from my pay without my written consent. And a summary of the compliance records I had kept, the DOT filings, Derek's instructions, my written refusal to sign, and the copies I had made of the final documents that went out under Derek's signature. She listened carefully. She asked good questions. She told me the unsigned demotion letter created a genuine ambiguity in my employment status that gave us real ground to work with. She told me the compliance records were a separate matter entirely and that I should not do anything with them yet. She said to sit tight and let her review everything fully. I told her I was not in a hurry. I just wanted to understand where I stood. The third thing I did was send 1 email to Gerald Okafor. Gerald was the procurement director at North Star Medical Supply. We had worked together directly for 6 years. He was a thorough, serious man who cared deeply about his supply chain and did not tolerate surprises well. I had earned his trust one solved problem at a time, the same way I had earned most things in my career. The email was short. I told him my role at Crestfield was transitioning. I said I wanted to make sure he had my personal contact information in case anything came up during the changeover. I said nothing negative about the company. I did not have to. That Friday night, I sat at the kitchen table with Sandra and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment. She said, "What happens Monday?" I told her I didn't know yet, but I had a feeling Monday was going to be interesting. Monday came the way Mondays always do, without warning, without ceremony, just suddenly there. I was at my desk by 7:30. I had my coffee. I had my email open. I looked from the outside like a man doing exactly what his reduced title suggested he should be doing. Nothing more. At 9:15, I heard it start. Not loudly. It was not an alarm or a shout. It was the particular sound of people in an open office beginning to move faster than they normally do. Chairs pushing back. Voices dropping lower, which somehow makes them more noticeable, not less. The specific energy of something going wrong that nobody wants to say out loud yet. What had happened was this. The Meridian Track contract renewal window had expired over the weekend. Tom Garza, operating without a valid point of contact and without any formal corporate contract in place, had followed his standard business protocol for a lapsed account. He had suspended Crestfield's access to the platform pending renegotiation. It was not personal. It was just process. Tom ran a real business with real terms, and when those terms were not met, the service stopped. That was true for every client he had. Crestfield was not special. What that suspension meant in practical terms was that Crestfield's entire regional compliance dashboard was offline. Delivery tracking for pharmaceutical routes was throwing errors. 3 Demoted portable runs that had gone out that morning. Drivers already on the road, cargo already moving, had no log completion confirmations feeding into the system, which meant Crestfield was sitting in a live compliance gap on regulated medical deliveries. Brandon Keefe, from what I heard later, found the Meridian track name in the vendor list and called the general support line. The support line had no record of an active contract for Crestfield. Brandon escalated to Derek at 9:40. I can only imagine what that conversation sounded like. I was not in the room. By 10 o'clock, North Star Medical Supplies operations team had flagged the missing delivery confirmations on 2 of their morning shipments. Missing confirmations on pharmaceutical deliveries are not a minor administrative issue. They are a contractual and regulatory matter. North Star put an immediate hold on approving Crestfield's monthly invoice while the gap was unresolved. That invoice was $2.3 million. At 10:22, my personal cell phone rang. It was Gerald Okafor. He did not call the Crestfield main line. He did not call Brandon Keefe, whose name he did not even have yet. He called me because I was the number he trusted and the name he associated with problems getting solved. I answered calmly. Gerald explained the situation. The missing confirmations, the invoice hold, the concern from his compliance team about the morning runs. He was not angry. Gerald was never the kind of man who led with anger. He was the kind of man who led with questions, which is sometimes more pressure, not less. I told him clearly and honestly that I was no longer the primary contact for his account at Crestfield. I told him I was sorry for any confusion during the transition. I gave him Tom Garza's direct number at Meridian Track and explained, in general terms, that Tom would be the right person to talk to about the platform access issue. I told Gerald that I wanted to make sure he was taken care of, and that if Crestfield authorized me to assist in any transition capacity, I was happy to do that. I did not say anything negative about Derek. I did not say anything negative about Brandon. I was professional. I was calm. I was in every way I could manage, exactly the person I had always been at work. After I hung up with Gerald, I sat for a moment and looked out the window beside my desk. The parking lot. A few pigeons on the light poles. The ordinary Tuesday morning world continuing exactly as it always did. Then my phone rang again. I looked at the screen. Derek Caulfield. I let it ring once more before I answered. Derek's voice on the phone was not the voice of a man leaning back in his chair with his hands folded on his stomach. It was tighter than that. Control, but only just. He said he needed me to come in. Not to my desk, to his office. He said there was a vendor situation that needed to be resolved quickly and that my familiarity with the account would be helpful. He used the word helpful. He did not mention the demotion. He did not apologize. He spoke as though the last 2 weeks had not happened, as though I was still exactly who I had always been to that company, and he was simply calling on me in a moment of need. I told him I would be there within the hour. I want to be honest about why I agreed to go. It was not because I wanted to help Derek. It was because I needed to see what was actually happening inside that building before I decided what to do next. There is a difference between hearing about a fire and standing close enough to feel the heat. I needed to feel the heat. When I walked in, I could read the room in about 30 seconds. Brandon was at his standing desk with his laptop open, talking quietly and quickly into his phone. 2 members of the operations team were huddled near the compliance terminal, looking like people who had been told to fix something they did not fully understand. Carol, at her desk near the executive wing, caught my eye when I walked past. She did not say anything. She did not have to. Derek met me in the hallway outside his office rather than waiting inside it. That told me something too. He walked me in, closed the door, and got straight to the point. The Meridian track access was down. North Star was holding the invoice. He needed the system restored, and he needed it done before the compliance gap triggered a formal regulatory flag. He was asking me to fix what he had broken by removing me. I nodded. I told him I understood the situation. I asked if I could take a few minutes to review where things stood before making any calls. He said yes. He seemed relieved that I was not making it difficult. I walked to the compliance terminal. I looked at the screen. I looked at the morning's logs. And that is when I saw it. The 3 pharmaceutical runs from that morning. the ones with no Meridian track confirmation data, had completion entries logged in the DOT reporting portal. Manual entries, timestamped at 9:51, 11 minutes after Derek had been notified of the outage and 40 minutes before any driver could have physically completed those routes based on the departure times I could see in the system. Someone had entered false completion data into a federal reporting system to close a compliance gap that was not yet resolved. I knew, without asking, who had given that instruction. I also knew from 9 years of working in that operation exactly what that act was. Falsifying DOT-regulated delivery records for pharmaceutical transport is not a gray area. It is not an HR issue. It is not a performance review conversation. It is a federal offense. And I had documentation, sitting in a folder in my attorney's possession, showing that the same pattern had occurred 2 years earlier on Derek's instruction during a cost-cutting quarter. I had refused to sign those filings. I had routed them directly to Derek. He had signed them himself, and I had kept copies of everything. I did not say a word inside that building. I told Derek I needed to make a call to Tom Garza to begin the restoration process, and that I would do it from outside where the reception was better. He nodded and told me to keep him updated. I walked out through the main floor, past Carol's desk, past Brandon at his standing desk, out through the front doors and into the parking lot. I called my attorney. I told her what I had seen. I gave her the timestamps. I described the entries. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for just a moment before she told me what I already knew, that this was no longer just an employment matter. She contacted the company's compliance insurance carrier that afternoon. A carrier, when presented with documented evidence of potential federal reporting violations, does not have the option to look away. They are legally obligated to notify the relevant oversight authority. The DOT's regional office does not move slowly when pharmaceutical transport records are involved. 4 days later, on a Friday afternoon, Derek Caulfield was escorted out of the Crestfield distribution building in handcuffs. I was parked across the street. I had not planned to be there. I had driven over without fully deciding why. I sat in my car and watched it happen through the windshield. 2 federal agents. Derek in his good suit, the one he wore for board presentations. The walk across the parking lot that felt like it took a long time. Brandon Keefe faced a separate review for his role in entering the manual compliance records that morning. His situation was its own matter, handled on its own timeline. I did not feel what I thought I would feel watching Derek walk out of that building. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel relief, exactly. What I felt was something harder and quieter than either of those things. Something closer to the feeling you get when a very long storm finally passes and you step outside and the air is still and cold and you're just glad the noise has stopped. I sat there for a few minutes. Then I drove home. The board moved fast, the way boards do when liability is suddenly visible. Within a week, I was contacted by outside counsel representing Crestfield's leadership. My employment status was formally restored. My title, Regional Operations Director, was reinstated in full. The back pay for the weeks I had spent at the reduced salary was included without me having to ask. The demotion letter, which I had never signed, was declared formally void. I worked with my attorney to negotiate a properly documented contract with Meridian Track, one with real terms, real renewal windows, and a named point of contact that would not disappear if I ever left the company. Tom Garza was gracious about it. He said he was glad things had worked out. I told him I was too. Gerald Okafor kept North Star Medical Supply with Crestfield, but it took a direct phone call from me to make that happen. I called Gerald personally and walked him through the operational recovery plan. I told him the compliance gaps had been identified and addressed. I told him the system was stable. He listened, asked several careful questions, and at the end told me that his team would continue the relationship on the condition that I remain the primary contact for their account. I told him that was exactly my intention. Brandon Keefe resigned about 2 weeks after Derek's arrest. I did not ask for that. I did not push for it. It happened on its own, the way things sometimes do when the foundation they were built on disappears. That evening, I came home to find another card on the kitchen counter. Lily had heard it had been a rough week. The card had a cartoon on the front, different dog, same kind of silly message inside. I set it next to the birthday card she had left me 3 weeks earlier. I sat at the kitchen table for a while. Sandra brought me coffee and sat across from me, and we did not say much. Sometimes you do not need to. The lesson I took from all of it is simple. Do your work carefully. Keep your records. Never let anyone convince you that being quiet means being weak. They thought demoting me would make me disappear. It just made me stop protecting them.